because the book, which is False Witness by Karin, I finished it 3 days ago, which is a huge win for me because generally it takes me twice that long to actually get around to the review. Sometimes it's because I don't have the time. Well, actually most time because I don't have the time. Other times, this girl doesn't usually look like this. This tends to be a blank slate. I don't really like the way I look on camera in my videos when I haven't put something on my face. But am I gonna put makeup on just to do a book review? Absolutely not, especially if it is 9 o'clock at night and as soon as I finish this, I'm gonna go wash it off. That's a waste of my makeup. That's a waste of my makeup remover. So I'm pretty proud of myself for remembering to do this on a day that I had work. So I could look pretty for you and feel a little bit better about myself when I rewatch these reviews. Anyways, as I said, today's book is Karin Slaughter's False Witness. It was another one of my book club books. I have not had a high success rate with our book club books. For the most part, I've thought they were pretty terrible. So I was looking forward to this book because I like Karin Slaughter. She is not for the faint of heart. This one I feel like is far more intense than anything else she's written. She's pretty graphic and she's got a mouth on her. That is what makes, for me, her book so successful, on top of the insane amount of research she must do. All the same, this one, it was a little too real and raw for me. It takes a lot to turn my stomach, and there were definitely moments in this book that I just didn't want to go through with it because I didn't know what else she was going to include. Let me just start with the title because it is something that I kept wondering what it had to do with the book. I think it comes from the Bible, you know, like do not bear false witness, which basically means lying. And the book centers around two sisters, Callie and Lee. Some things they've done that are not particularly legal. Lee, on top of that, is a lawyer. She has to defend somebody from their past, and he is blackmailing her into giving him a proper defense, which I know is kind of an oxymoron. Like, as his lawyer, she should give him the best defense possible, but because she knows the truth behind everything, that's not what she wants to do. I think the false witness just is a reflection on the characters and the situations that they get themselves into, as in, like, who's right, who's wrong, who should get in trouble, who shouldn't. Anywho, let's get into the plot. When the book opens, I thought it was quite a clever opening. It was something I didn't really see coming. We have a 16-year-old, 14-year-old, I don't quite remember how old she is. We get the perspective of Callie. She is taking care of this little boy named Trevor, getting him ready for bed, talking about all the annoyances and the things that he's doing that she doesn't like, how she never knows when his dad is gonna come home. So for me, I'm thinking she's the mother, and she just has a really crap kid and a super crap husband. Turns out that she's the babysitter. She has had or been having a sexual relationship with the father, Buddy. We are told that she knows that there's a camera in his living room. She thinks nothing of it except that he uses it to blackmail his friends because he is an unsavory character. He comes home, they're getting into some stuff. Things happen, and Callie ends up getting pushed into a piece of furniture and hurting herself. And then throughout this whole process, the camera gets pulled off the shelf, and then Buddy starts to panic, starts to get mean. One thing leads to another. He begins to beat her, and you know that the end result of this is that he's gonna kill her. But then Callie grows a backbone, fights back, and ends up grabbing a knife and nicking the artery in his leg and killing him. Fast forward 30 years, her sister Lee is now something of a big shot attorney. I don't really know how successful she is or how wealthy she is. it seems like she had been in practice for herself. This book is set within COVID, and she and her husband slash ex-husband Walter, I say that because they're separated, but they're not divorced, and they still love each other. They decided to enroll their daughter Maddie in this ultra private school because it's supposed to be safer during the time of COVID. She decided to go into the public sector and join this massive mega law firm in order to make more money for that. Although she initially says that she and Walter have scraped together every penny they have in order to send Maddie to the school, yet she has a luxury car and she seems to have a pretty plush lifestyle. So I don't really know how all this fits together. Maybe she meant they had scraped together every penny they had, and now they don't. Walter is in law as well, but he, I think, works more with unions for the fire department. We get the sense that she has a tenuous relationship with Maddie and a complicated relationship with Walter. And that was something that bothered me. Not Walter necessarily, although it took a really long time to get any kind of answer on that. But with Maddie, I wasn't sure. So it sounded like when COVID happened, she had to move in with Walter. I never got the impression that she moved out, like that she was in a place to move out until all of a sudden she wasn't living with him anymore, but Maddie was still living with him. I couldn't quite figure out why she was living with him, if it was, and this quite possibly could have been in the book and I missed it, but I wasn't sure if it was because it was better for school or if she was having a problem with her mother, because she's not a likable character. She's quite annoying. I think she's a little bit, actually a lot bit spoiled. I didn't quite understand the need for her. Grand scheme of things, yes, but specifically, she was underdeveloped, and I didn't really care to hear about her. I didn't like her. They're at Maddie's school play. She gets a text from someone saying, "Oh, I'm really sorry what's about to happen." And then she gets a phone call from the big boss. The big boss says, "You need to get down here because we have this client." The client is a guy named Andrew Tennant, who is being charged with rape. I'm saying when we hear, or like when this rape is described, it turned my stomach. I prefer not to have to be subjected to that kind of stuff, okay? She gets to the law firm, and here's something. I know I'm taking a really long time here, guys. This is something that I find funny, but then irritating towards the end. Slaughter is a native to Georgia. I don't know if this view is something that's just supposed to be facetious or if she really doesn't like UGA. But it turns out that the head of this law firm is a huge UGA fan. He's a UGA alum, and it's quite possible that all of the heads of this law firm are, like the boys club, and so it's funny because everything is go dogs, everything is black and red. It gets a little annoying because I'm a dog fan, and so maybe that's why I get annoyed. Maybe nobody else would get annoyed if they don't like the dogs or if they just don't care about college football. But you get the sense that Lee looks down upon this, that Slaughter looks down upon loving your school this much. Maybe it's a little bit excessive, but like, if you love your school, you love your school, and if you have the money to do it, why don't you deck out your entire office in the colors? It might be gaudy, but is that something to turn your nose up at? Anyways, but the other thing that I thought was not actually that funny. I thought it was kind of ridiculous, and it makes me wonder, for all of you narrators out there, when you narrate a book, does nobody go back and listen to it to check for errors in continuity or flow? Do the authors not listen to the book? Because anybody who knows anything about UGA, stands for University of Georgia, UGA, and they know that the mascot is the bulldog, so it's the Georgia Bulldog, and his name is what? Uga. U-G-A. Uga. Uga. Each sequential dog is Uga 1, Uga 2, Uga 3, whatever. This narrator called the dog Uga. And I was like, how do you not catch that, okay? This isn't just, I pronounce things differently than you. That is the name of their mascot. Well, okay, technically they have two. They have Hairy Dog, who's the dude who dresses up in the bulldog costume. And then there's Uga, the actual bulldog. He is shown on every single football game in his little house, chilling like a villain. How do you get that wrong? It's... So, yes, she's called into the top floor and she meets Andrew, Andrew's girlfriend Sydney, and Andrew's mother Linda. Who do you think Andrew is? Trevor from the... I don't know if it was a prologue or if it was the first chapter. It was very prologue-y. And then we learn that Lee had babysat Trevor before Callie. I was a little confused about Trevor in the beginning because in that prologue, kid's a brat. But then when Lee meets him and kind of goes about some of the story, we get the impression that he was a sweet kid. He had his flaws, but he wasn't that bad. Only for her then to basically vilify him and be presented as that bratty kid from the prologue. So I didn't really like those parts because I thought it was confusing as per characterization. We get into the deal of why she's been called into this meeting. The apology text had been because he'd had a different lawyer and then he fired her and requested Lee. Here's a spoiler. Here's like the major spoiler. The big thing about it all as to why Andrew wanted Lee, why Andrew thought that he could blackmail Lee into doing everything he wanted and getting him out of trouble. Because he knew what they did to his dad. Over the course of the novel, we are told the measures that those two girls took to hide the murder. And actually, another thing about this murder is we're led to believe that it was Callie who ultimately killed him. But what happened was Callie called Lee. Lee comes in kind of as the cleaner. They're going about doing what they're doing, and Lee realizes Buddy's not dead. Blood does not spurt if the heart is not pumping. She suffocates him. They've gone about making all of these plans and taking all of these measures to ensure that nobody knows what happened. And a little caveat here. I know all of us sensibly minded people are saying the police would not fault you. If you went to the police and you told them what happened, they would say, okay, this was self-defense because he'd been raping Callie. However, the explanation we're given is that they come from the wrong side of the tracks. They have records. Who's gonna believe them? So yes, they clean everything up. They destroy all evidence. They chop Buddy to pieces, and then they bury him in the foundation of a new construction, and there you go. It's not until right before all this stuff happens with Andrew does Andrew find a second tape. Because as I said, Callie knew about one tape. What turns out is that this tape, it wasn't blackmailing his friends. Because Buddy, as I said, unsavory character. He's kind of a muscle man. She's just thinking, oh, he holds things over these guys' heads because of whatever he does in his job. No, he was taping them. He would only sleep with her on the couch. And when I say sleep with her, I'm putting that very mildly. And he would record it. Then he would bring his buddies over. So in a sense, she was right. He was blackmailing them. But then his buddies would come over and they would watch this rape porn. That's the only video that the girls knew about it, or the only camera the girls knew about it. But it turns out that for some reason, Buddy decided to put another camera in the ceiling, and he enlisted Trevor to do it because he couldn't fit into the attic. Like, he couldn't get into the crawl space, get through the door, and the door was in Trevor's room. Trevor, I guess, had forgotten all about it because he was 10 years old when all of this happens. Then when his mother hailed from a very wealthy family. She had married Buddy really young. So you get the idea that there's a pattern of abuse from Buddy. He had tried it on Lee. Lee had told him to stop, so he did. But then he picks it back up with Callie. You understand that they've gone through a lot of babysitters. They've had a lot of trouble with babysitters. So putting pieces together, you realize he's probably tried it with all those girls too. And then it's either Lee or Callie. One of them comments that they always thought Linda was so much older than them. And Linda was in nursing school, or she was nursing at this point in time. And they just always thought she was so much older than them, when in fact she probably was maybe 5 to 10 years older than them. So you get the impression that Buddy was doing this to her too. He just somehow convinced her to marry him, but she was cut off because of it. Then after Buddy disappears, her family continues to ignore her until her dad dies. And then they embrace her back into the fold, and they own successful car dealerships. She becomes a boss of it in some capacity. I don't know if it's like a family business or if she ends up taking over the entirety of it. This raises herself and Trevor out of the slums and into a higher echelon. Before I go further, every time I talk about Trevor or like say the name Trevor, I wish, because basically from the point we meet Trevor as Andrew, we refer to him as Andrew. And I would have liked a little bit more of Andrew Trevor, as in each name connotates to a different side of him, that it's a reference to, well, if they say Trevor, that's the good side of him. If they say Andrew, that's the bad side, or vice versa. I would go with vice versa, except that Andrew is pretty nasty dude. But maybe Andrew is the Hyde of it, and Trevor is the Jekyll. So all the bad things that Andrew does is the Trevor coming out of him. Anyways, I didn't understand why we had to switch names and then completely drop the whole Trevor side of it, except that he dropped his original last name too and took on his mother's maiden name. And so I understand it's a shedding of a skin, it's becoming a new person. But because he obviously was affected by his father, because whether it was before or after he learned what the girls did, like saw the videotape of them killing his dad, that he was angry at whoever made his dad disappear. He was affected by the loss of his father. I thought that really could have gone into giving him more dimension. But yes, Linda decides to sell their house, that old house. I guess this is when Trevor or Andrew remembers about the camera in the ceiling. He goes up there and he discovers it. He discovers the tape on it. And he had already discovered Buddy's collection of rape porn, because Buddy had taped over all of his old Disney movies and left them in the cases that were in Trevor's room. And then when Trevor/Andrew was in college, he decided to pull them out and be nostalgic, only to find something completely different. When he finds the videotape of Lee ultimately killing Buddy, that's when he knows he has leverage. But then they have mutually insured destruction, because this one rape he's being charged of is not the only accusation he's had against him. And all these other accusations, there's a pattern, there's a modus operandi, an MO, if you will. And so she's like, look, if you show this to anybody, they're gonna see what Callie did to your dad, and then they're gonna see that reflected in your crimes. But still, that doesn't mean that he's not going to extort something from her. He's not going to force her to do what he wants, because if that footage is shown, that's the end of her career. She's going to jail, the end of her family life, the end of her marriage, or what's left of it. I might get into it if I remember. We just go through the novel, and then what we learn is Callie, so Lee, when Andrew asks about her, Lee says that Callie lives in Iowa and has a couple kids and is married to a farmer. It turns out that Callie is a junkie. She currently is working for a vet who has early onset Alzheimer's or is suffering from dementia, and she is addicted to heroin. But she's been taking methadone, which, if you know anything about drugs, methadone is supposed to help them quit. However, then these drug addicts can become methadone addicts. It can have an adverse effect. She uses that job to steal methadone and also steal other drugs meant for the animals, and then she can sell that on the street for other things. Lee finds her and says, look, this is what's going on, and they kind of team up. She ends up going back to their mother's house, who, as much as I thought that Slaughter could have done better with Maddie and at least the Andrew Trevor aspect, he was really well done. He was a great villain. But yes, she is incredible with her characters, her characterization. They're so real and so raw, and that mother is no exception. It took me at least a long time to realize that it wasn't that she was a terrible mother, but she was schizophrenic or something. She had a legit mental disease. So it was interesting to have them back together. The book just unwinds with Lee trying to figure out how to get out of this problem, Callie dealing with her addiction and then dealing with her demons, and then we get Sydney, Andrew's fiance, girlfriend, wife. I don't really understand. I didn't understand her. I didn't understand her role in the novel. So yes, as much as I said Slaughter is good with her characters, I didn't quite understand why Sydney was there, what she added to it, except that she was crazy as well. What happens in the end is Callie, she got addicted to heroin because of an accident in high school. So it left her physically damaged. It left her in a lot of pain that led to an addiction. And so she's just kind of like, I'm ready for it all to be over. Andrew has a fixation on her because of that imprint he had as a child, and then, finding the porn when he was in college. She ends up tricking Lee, because what they want to do is find the footage, because Andrew intimated that if anything happened to him, this footage was going to be leaked. So she'd already tried to find the tapes, only to learn that there's backups. She sends Lee off one way, and then she goes to the original home where she finds Andrew, who has kidnapped Walter. She had previously grabbed some kind of, I forget, pentobarbital or something from the vet's office and a syringe. While he is shooting her up, she sticks the needle into his heart. So basically they kill each other. And there we go. The end of the book. One thing that I thought was really, really annoying, probably the most annoying part of this book. Well, actually, no, there's two. The first is Lee's guilt. For some reason, in the end, I understand it. But getting there, it took too long. But she has this guilt because, and this is something, please explain to me if you have any experience with this at all. Buddy had tried to molest her first, and he did actually molest her. But in the end, she said, leave it alone, and he left it alone. And then she passed the job off to Callie, which is how things started unraveling with Callie. I understand that guilt. But what I don't understand is how Lee was able to forget about what Buddy did. I knew she was driven. I knew that all she wanted to do was get out of town and improve her life. But how do you forget an event that traumatic? I guess she is completely unaware. When I roll my eyes, it's because she admits in 20/20 vision, in hindsight, that she had noticed the changes in Callie. But until Callie calls her saying, I hurt Buddy, she had no idea what was going on. And so I guess from that point forward, she carries an immense amount of guilt. I got really tired hearing about this guilt, about how everything was her fault. It's not that I disagree with it. I disagree with the severity of it. I disagree with how pointed it became. You couldn't get away from it. And it was always right there in your face. There was no undertone of guilt. It was, oh, it's all my fault. I should have done something. I should have been better. I should have saved Callie. I think I would have responded better to it had it not been so blatant every single time. And then at the end, what does Callie say? It wasn't your fault. Which, if I were Callie, I would have been pissed. I would have been like, he molested you and you forgot about it and you hoisted him off on me? I would have been a lot more pissed. But the other thing I was annoyed by was the COVID thing, because I didn't understand why it needed to be so heavily emphasized. I had thought at one point it was because there was going to be this subplot about Lee giving Callie COVID, and it had this massive impact on her. But that's all it was she had a really bad case of COVID. She suffered symptoms, and by this point, she is still suffering from loss of appetite. I thought there's going to be more to it, because we get all of these hints and all of these mentions about Lee's guilt once again, and about Lee giving Callie COVID, how when she got sick, she and Walter had this whole plan mapped out, yet in the end, she was like 2 days in before it all went out the window, and all she wanted was her estranged sister to come take care of her. And we had this major emphasis on something that it is relevant, and yes, it will go into the history books, because it didn't have a major impact on the story. I got tired of hearing about it. I got tired of hearing about the masks. I thought it was interesting to see how COVID affected law and court and going to trial and all those things. But on the whole, we got a lot of mentions of COVID related things that we could have done without. Another spoiler is that Maddie is actually Callie's daughter. I thought that could have been played up a bit more too. Maybe the tension between Maddie and Lee comes because Lee is not her mother, and she feels like maybe Callie would have been the better mother, that she and Maddie share more interests. Even that, I think that's a stretch. I think that's me pretending, me trying to make something more relevant, trying to intertwine it into the story and the plot and the characters a little bit more. We are told very early on that there had been one lengthy stretch of time in which Callie had been sober. Turns out that's the stretch of time in which she'd gotten pregnant. But even then, the story is told from Lee's point of view, which reminds me, the book goes back and forth in time, and I don't think it needed to. Having that initial prologue was effective. But then seeing everything else, it was unnecessary. Like, you could have covered that same information just as effectively in the natural order of storytelling. So pulling back, it took me out of the story. But anyways, we get this picture of an extremely happy Lee and Walter in their apartment, and Callie shows up, and this upsets Lee. And I had already started skipping by this point. There was a lot of internal monologue, and I was over it. Callie presents this box in which Lee thinks is a cat. They have some kind of conversation. The gist of it is Callie wants to leave this box with them. Lee pulls Walter aside and is like, I can't do it. And he's like, what are you talking about? She's like, Callie has this uncanny ability to pick cats, which I thought was a bit ludicrous. Turns out that there's no cat in the box, it's the baby. As of the present tense, Maddie still doesn't know that Callie's her mother. There's all these reasons that are given, and so I don't know if she'll ever know that Callie was her mother, and we learned that her dad was another junkie who overdosed. The thing that I was about to say, which I decided I'd leave until I actually finished my initial thought. Callie and Lee are painted as two vastly different personalities. Callie is the messed up one. Lee is the one who has her life together. Yet, Lee can still be a force to be reckoned with. She grew up on the streets. She knows how to take care of herself. Even though she drives a fancy car and has a fancy high-paying job, you don't mess with her. That was the Lee I really enjoyed. The one who, when she needed to, she could pull that out. But then she, throughout the book, couldn't take care of herself. She didn't know how to handle situations, and we would have to have Callie talk her down. Who is Lee? So as well as she was written, I found myself not quite understanding who she was. Was she a tough chick? Or was she someone who cried about everything, that was super emotional? Was she good at her job? Or was she just a plebe? That was another thing where she's earning 10 grand an hour, yet the head of the company doesn't even know her name. Where does she sit in all of this? My final point, I'm sure there's something else I wanted to talk about, but this is the only one I remember, and my computer keeps doing this really funny thing where it stops my recording, and I'm over it. Walter and Lee's marriage. Apparently Lee has this habit, because of her upbringing and whatever she and Callie did to Buddy, she has this habit of self-sabotage. At some point, maybe she thought her life was too good and she didn't deserve Walter, so she never cheated on him. What she did was worse, which he had alcoholic parents, so she became a closet alcoholic until the day she was no longer in the closet about it, and then he left her. However, then we get this mention. So in the beginning, we get the mention of they're separated, yet then she moves into his house, and then she finds herself in his bed. And then we meet her nighttime friend, and then we learn how he has a nighttime friend as well, and it seems like he could care less about what Lee is doing. But then they're in love and they want to be together, and he's doing what he can. He does things so that they can be together. She's like, I'm going to implode my marriage by revealing certain things to him. And I was like, what's going on here? I can see the pieces. I can put the pieces together, but that doesn't mean the pieces are making sense. And maybe this is just a book that's requiring too much thought and attention for me. And so I simply didn't respond to it as well as I would have liked to. I will say try it. She is an exceptional writer. I enjoy her voice. As I said, be wary. If you have a weak stomach, this is not going to be the book for you. But if you like smart writing, someone who does her homework, which, holy cow, if I could have access to her resources, I would love to know who she talks to, what questions she asks. It's amazing. It's impressive. So yes, check out the book. Tell me if you've ever read Karin Slaughter. Tell me what your favorite book of hers is. That's that, and I will see you later. Bye.